Hello, my name is Samantha Taylor, and I'm delighted that you could join us today. I'm a researcher at IFI Global. Welcome to our online event on the selection of fund directors, mancos, service providers, and domiciles. We are doing this because we are launching Selection Intelligence Service. I'm going to hand you over to Simon Osborne, who will speak for approximately 20 minutes, and then we'll take time for questions. If you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Over to Simon.
Thank you very much, Samantha, and I'm delighted you can all join us today. I believe we have people following this from the US, from Cayman, and from many countries across Europe. You are all very welcome. For those of you that don't know us particularly, and I know there are some people in the US in that category, I should say that IFI Global is a research and media house based in the city of London. Selection Intelligence Service, which what we're talking about today, is a product that we're just in the process of launching. As Samantha said, today we are focusing on the selection particularly of independent fund directors, third-party mancos, service providers who meet a certain ESG standards. I'll come on and say a bit more about that in a few minutes, and fund domiciles. I'm going to talk, as Samantha says, for around about 20 minutes. I very much hope we will get some questions. If we don't, we'll be finished long before 1:45, but hopefully we will. But even if we get lots of questions, we will finish by 1:45. And just as I predicted, Samantha, it is happening again. It's amazing why it always happens. It always goes a bit frozen at the beginning and then comes back into life, although not this time, strangely enough. Why is that happening? Ah, finally, it's kicked into life. I don't know why that is. So what is Selection Intelligence Service? It is primarily for, as we put here, US managers when they go offshore or come to Europe, but any manager anywhere in the world, of course, can use it. As many of you probably know, we launched a publication for US alternative managers back in September, which has led us now to launching SIS. SIS and our US publication, which is called FSI, will be working very closely together. Now, these areas mentioned on the screen are the areas that SIS is going to focus upon. And we've picked these areas because in each case, we like to think we've got some real specialization and knowledge of them. We have been running a publication on fund governance for over 10 years now called the NED. We've been following third-party mancos ever since AIFMD came along, and that's a very long time ago as well too. And at the beginning of last year, we launched an ESG publication. The specialization of that is how it impacts the fund industry, and fund domiciliation is the subject we've covered many times, particularly in research reports and in many articles over the years. So those are our four areas of specialization. What Selection Intelligence Service is basically, first and foremost, it's going to be tailored shortlists for managers to meet their particular unique or unusual, perhaps, research criteria. We will give them shortlists individualized, if that's the right word for them. All the information provided by SIS is going to be confidential, both confidential to the users of the service, meaning the managers and their advisors, and also confidential in terms of the information we're providing them. In other words, we will not share, other than obviously with the individual manager in question, any of the names that we've given that particular manager, and we will not be releasing the names of the managers to any party at all at any time who may be using the service. And by the way, there is no charge for managers for using this or their advisors for the first time. We want to get the word out. We want as many people to take advantage of it as possible, particularly, as I said earlier, in the US. We're very keen on US managers coming to us for individual and independent, unbiased advice. We've got no skin in the game. It makes no difference to us which Manco you use, which directors you use, which domicile you go to, etc. We have no commercial interest in any of them at all, although we like to think we've got a fair degree, if not a lot of knowledge on all those particular areas. But there is no charge, as I say, for managers using this service for the first time. If they like it and come back and use it again, then we will ask them to become a corporate subscriber of ours, and then they can continue to use the service that way. Aside from what I've just said in terms of the tailoring of individual shortlists for managers, there's another very important reason why we are doing this, is that we will be launching what we're calling the SIS data service, and that is information that we will be giving to subscribers on the types of managers that are using SIS by their strategy, whatever category they're in, their size, their geography, etc. To repeat, we will never give the individual names of those managers out, but we will categorize them in those various different ways and show the market who is using SIS in that more generalized way, and particularly for what purpose are they using it? Are they using it to get information on fund directors, on jurisdictions, on service providers, on Mancos, etc.? And what in particular are they looking for? Are they looking for perhaps directors with certain particular skills for their boards? Are they looking for a Manco that does a particular thing in a particular way? Are they looking for a jurisdiction which has a particularly quick setup time? Whatever it may be, we will be publishing that information as part of our data service. I expect it will take a little bit of time for us to generate enough information to make this meaningful, but you've got to start somewhere, so we're basically starting now, and my hope and expectation is by the middle to latter part of next year, we'll be generating a reasonable amount of data that will be, perhaps for the first time, correct me if I'm wrong here, anybody, for the first time we'll have really up-to-date information on service provider searches in the industry that will be useful. I don't think anything like that is available in the market at the moment, so hopefully it will fill a gap. Let's get into the individual areas and what we're going to do in those particular individual areas. Some of you I know today have perhaps been on our other webcasts when we had specific things for the NED Forum, where we've done events just for our publication, the NED. So you may have seen stuff on our green rated directors before. There are three sets that I'm going to generalize and keep this fairly short today because we have other things to cover. There are three sets of criteria to be in what we call the green rated database of directors, which is the top echelon. You do not have to be a subscriber of ours to be rated. We want the best, whether you are a subscriber or not. And I know there are a number of individual directors following this thing today. We would encourage you to submit your resume, your CV, your bio to us. And if you meet the criteria, then you'll go into our green rated database, the top level. There's a yellow and a red, which we won't go into today as well. But the green rated is what we're going to use for this. And how that works is you have to have at least 10 years relevant experience, meaning you portfolio management, risk management, fund administration, or if you're a lawyer, fund legal work, etc. All the usual normal ways that is counted. Independence, we've taken the UK Corporate Governance Code definition of independence, but we've added to it because we don't think organizations that do multiple services for managers that also provide directors are necessarily independent unless, and this is an important unless, they differentiate their service, the fund governance service, from other parts of their business that they may be doing. If they don't, we don't think that's necessarily independent enough, because that entity, that large entity doing a whole host of services for that particular manager, we don't think is sufficiently arm's length, and they can't afford to resign from a particular fund board if there is a problem. And capacity, we've taken the Central Bank of Ireland's guidance on that, which is time guidance. I think it's, was it 200 days or a year that they think you can allow for this. It's all in the NED. There's much more detail. It's laid out there in tremendous detail in the NED. So as I say, whether or not you are a subscriber, we want you to be in our database if you reach this particular bar. If you are a subscriber, then we will give you a green rated logo to use. You're very welcome to use that in your promotional material, on your emails, whatever it is you want to use it for, and say that this independent organization, IFI Global, with its publication in the NED, has rated you in the top echelon of independent fund directors. So that is directors. On the third-party Manco selection side, there you see it on the screen. These are the things that we are going to be asking. We are, and already have been, actually, in fact, in many cases for a very long time, over the last few years. The main third-party Mancos, or all the third-party Mancos, particularly in Dublin and Luxembourg, those particular questions. We do think it is important that Mancos provide information. We don't think this is always done, information on the other managers that are using that particular Manco and who they are, even if you can't get all the information precisely on the managers. Aggregate information is important, and the individual names. I don't think that should be confidential. It shouldn't be difficult to do. Ownership is very important and becoming more important because the business has been taken over by the private equity industry in the recent past, and one hears stories all the time of the private equity investors wanting the Mancos to do more for less, perhaps in some cases cutting back, as I've heard one or two stories of recently, on tech spend, which is huge tech spend at Mancos. So it is important to know something about the ownership of the Manco. Fee structures, there are various different ways that's done. I was talking to one yesterday, which is purely a flat fee. They have a flat fee for every single fund that it does. That is very unusual. Most people do a combination of a percentage of the AUM of the fund with a certain minimum startup fee. I also think it's important you should find out something about the background of the Manco. Some of these firms, like Apex, has brought up a number of Mancos in the last year or two. They've come from the administration background. There's Khan, there's Waystone, ex-DMS, and KB that come from the governance side. There's others which are entirely independent. There's Fuchs that comes from wealth management, etc., etc., etc. I think it is important to know something about the background of the organization that has set up the Manco. Then, of course, years in the business is also an important thing to bear in mind too. So those are the criteria at the moment. It might change in next year and after. Those are the criteria, and so any manager from the US or anywhere else that wants, we will give them a short list based upon information provided from our research with those questions. Finally, sorry, not finally, what am I talking about finally? ESG-orientated service provider selection. We thought originally perhaps we should try and do all forms of fund administrator or something like that, but that we just don't have the resources. It'd be a massive job. It would take up far too much of our time. There's obviously so many different service providers, particularly in the fund administration side. So we decided to focus particularly on those service providers, particularly fund administrators, who have specialized as stepping up to be ESG orientated, ESG friendly. They're taking the bit between the teeth that are really going for it on the ESG side. So if you are a manager of an ESG fund, you want to have an ESG orientated service provider, that's something SAIS can provide too. The questions on the screen are questions we've put out to service providers in all the international fund jurisdictions, asking them whether they have those policies or code of ethics, or whether they have a documented diversity policy, are they carbon neutral, etc. I have to confess we haven't had great response to that. Is putting it as mildly as I can possibly put it. Samantha is smiling as I say that, and she's right to. But we are persisting with it. We do have a few. I talked to a very ESG orientated service provider just this week. So there are some ones that are really taking the bit between the teeth and are going for it out there. So they will definitely be included in this. Just a little story as an aside. When we first sent these questions out to the market, they should remain nameless. There was a service provider, I think it was in Jersey. This is to Samantha's predecessor. He asked the question, well, why are you sending us these questions? What's it got to do with us? That just gives you a sense of where the service provider industry was, at least in some jurisdictions, a year or so ago. It is changing. It's not changing very rapidly, but it is changing. And certainly most fund administrators are doing something in ESG. The question is not whether or not they've got a unit within them that they're trying to use to get business. Are they doing anything in terms of adopting ESG practices themselves? And that's where perhaps we come in. Fund domicile selection. Very different, of course. There's only a relatively small number of reputable international fund domiciles where any manager would consider domiciling his or her funds. So a slightly different aspect of SIS. What we're doing here is making sure that managers are aware of all the options that are available to them. We find they don't necessarily always do know what all the options are available to them, but to be fair to them, fund domiciliation until now has been, over the last decade or more, has been, there hasn't been very much to say. There's no reason why they needed to necessarily know about all the options that were available to them. They just followed the crowd into the jurisdiction that they wanted to be in because everybody else was there and their investors knew it. And that's all they needed to know. Things are changing. But we think it's important that managers find a jurisdiction that is not just right for their current investors, but will be right, or hopefully will be right for their future investors. I've seen time and again, people go into a particular place because they have a particular investor or a few investors that works for them in that particular place. They want to expand the investor base and it doesn't work at that particular time. So that's something they should bear in mind when they're setting up for the first time. And as I've already said, and this is the most important thing about why we've included domiciliation in this service, is that it was pretty basic. There was really not very much to say about it. No one needed to spend a lot of time on it. That really has changed. We have Brexit. Brexit's turning out to be, particularly for those of you in the States following this, perhaps even a decade-long process, not a one-off event. And here we sit on a grey and miserable November afternoon here in the UK with the likelihood or the possibility of what the British, is called Article 16 being triggered over problems in Northern Ireland, and then the EU threatening a trade war in response if that happens. Financial services are not directly involved in that trade war should it come to be, but they will, I think, in some respect or another, be caught in the crossfire. There's no way that the European Commission is going to want to do favours for the UK asset management industry if they're fighting a trade war with the British government at the same time. But it's not just Brexit. There's been a slew of regulatory changes. The one thing you can rely upon from the European Union, there's always more regulations coming along. We've got the really big one next year in the second level 2 SFDR. There's been many other things too, which I won't go into now, but there are all sorts of regulatory changes coming along that could affect fund domiciliation. We're going to get AIFMD2 any day now, and that will be big as well because it could affect private placement, potentially could affect reverse solicitation, other things too. So BEPS, that stands for base erosion and profit sharing. That's on the tax side from the OECD. I'm not going to go into this now. Before COVID came along, everyone was talking about BEPS. We haven't had much in the way of conversation about BEPS since COVID's happened, but in simple, brief terms, it basically is the reason, or a very large part of the reason, why all these fund jurisdictions are now having to put much more local substance in to show they have substance in those jurisdictions where funds are domiciled. So, and BEPS has not gone away, even though it hasn't been in the headlines for quite a long time. And there are other things coming along on the tax front as well as the regulatory changes. So those are things that managers should be aware of. They may not be affected by them, But they should be at least aware of what is going on or what is likely to go on in the next year or two when they're deciding where to domicile their funds. So how can SIS be used by managers? There's three different ways, broadly speaking. The first is simply as an intelligence mechanism. They can come to us and say, we think we know who we want to pick in terms of our fund directors, in terms of our service providers, in terms of our Manco, whatever it may be, even our jurisdiction. But please, could you just give us a bit of background intelligence on what's going on, for example, in the Manco market, what's going on there that perhaps we might not be aware of. That hasn't really been out there before, so we can readily supply that. So just background intelligence on the particular areas of the market that are of interest to you. Also, it can be used just as a sounding board or stroke third-party opinion. Or they may say to someone, and this, by the way, has happened to me many times over the years, and this is done on a friend's basis. People might call you up or email you and say, Simon, I'm thinking about picking Charlie to be my fund director in Cayman, or Henrietta to be my fund director in Jersey or Guernsey, or whatever it is, or Paddy in Dublin. Do you know him or her? What do you think? Or do you know this particular Manco in Dublin? Any thoughts on it? No, I just have happily given my views on that particular entity or person, if asked on a very confidential basis. So that I'm sure will continue, as it has happened in the past. So those are two ways it can be used. And finally, can be used in the full proper way of providing proper shortlists from the data that we have. That, as I said, and we have no skin in the game. We have no particular bias in any way for any particular individual entity, jurisdiction, you name it. Finally, before we get into Q&As, I see at least there are at least two questions, luckily, on the screen. So here are the do's. If you're in selection across all those areas, get intelligence on the dynamics of the market. That, as I said earlier, hasn't always been necessary in the past. We do think it's becoming more important now and continue to become more important in the future. Have current data on directors, Mancos, service providers, domiciles, when you are making decisions. I know very well that many law firms, for example, will have lists of directors they'll give to their manager clients to select from. But those, I've heard this many times as well, that this can get out of date very quickly. They can include directors who've closed, they don't want any more positions, etc., or other changes in other ways. And they may have been put together 3 or 4 years ago, or whatever it is. That's not what the law firm is really there for. That's just the sort of thing they're doing to help their clients. It is our job to keep those lists up to date. So come to us for the same, for a selected shortlist. And an obvious one, but not always done. Obviously, if you can, consult your investors when you're setting up, whether it be for jurisdictional choice, directors, or whatever it may be, and see whether you can get some feedback from them. And here are two obvious don'ts. And it doesn't happen all the time that they don't do this. Don't rely upon advice from your lawyer, particularly in the US. And as I've said many times, we have a fair number of people in the US following this. I understand perfectly well why you would want to get advice from your lawyer. I'm not saying you shouldn't take advice from your lawyer. They are, after all, the experts on many of the subjects we've been talking about this afternoon here. But don't just take their advice. See what else is out there. Again, come to us or use us as a sounding board with your lawyer and ask whether there are some other choices that you should consider. And maybe you probably will end up with the lawyer's recommendation, but at least look around and see what else there is out there. And don't always assume that directors, Manco service providers, or jurisdictions indeed, are all the same. They are not. They can be very different indeed. We hear again from the US quite often, some of those things, particularly independent directors for boards, are seen as necessary evils. They're just seen as a cost, something they have to do when they go to somewhere like Cayman or wherever it may be. That's, I think, the wrong way of looking at it. Directors can be very helpful, and they can do things to help you along your way in your international journey. again, we can help. Hopefully, you find those particular individuals that can help you with that too. So on that basis, that's all I want to say. I'm going to now hand over to Samantha. Samantha, to read out any questions we may have. So do you want to fire away?
Do you check that the information you get from the independent directors is accurate?
Do we check the information from independents is accurate? That's actually a very good question, but no, we don't, because we're not, this is an important point, we're not there to say, pick this particular individual. We will give a short list of 2, 3, 4, I don't know what it will be, but that sort of number. That is the job of the manager before he or she hires that particular individual. We assume, and I'm pretty sure every single time we've had information, it is accurate. I would be amazed if it isn't. It's not worth our while making things up. There might be a bit of mild exaggeration from time to time, but really it is not in their interest to really come up with anything that's going to be evidently false. But even in that, even if that was the case, we don't see it as our job to verify that person's credentials. If that manager wants to take it to the point of hiring that person for their board, that's when he or she should do all the proper checks. That's not what we're doing.
Okay. How many service providers have answered all those ESG questions that you've put to them?
I feel like I should decline to answer that question because the answer is very, very few of them, as Samantha knows as well. So very few of them have done that. But looking optimistically, I think we'll get more. Less than 10, definitely. Probably even less than 5. But a few have, and more are going there. So actually, that short list is very short. But I hope as we get into 2022, we'll be adding to it as time goes by. I cannot believe it doesn't make sense for service providers to be able to answer those really fairly simple questions, to be able to answer and get their act together, because it's just in their interest in terms of getting business in this ESG era. There's not just the ESG funds to think about. Of course, I think you should have an ESG compliant service provider for an ESG fund. But even if it's a fund got nothing to do with ESG, I think coming down the line, the kind of due diligence questions from a manager are going to be on diversity of the service provider and a whole host of other things that you would have seen on the screen a few minutes ago. So that's my best answer to that question without giving a particular number.
Yeah. How can you avoid your personal preferences influencing your shortlist selections?
That's a very good question, because I suppose our one level or another, we all have our favorites in life and whatever it is. And so people we're friendly with, probably, who make the grade, were, who, like anybody in any walk of life, way outside the fund industry or inside the fund industry, we all probably have a subjective bias to people that we like, I would have thought. And I'm sure I'm no different from anybody else who walks the planet on that basis. However, the most important thing to say about that is that you have to meet the criteria for us to put you into that short list. Whether we love you or hate you or have not very strong feelings one way or another, you have to meet the criteria objectively, and that is the important point. And we have, I've already said it once, if not twice already this afternoon, but it's important to emphasize again, we really do not have any commercial interest in whether somebody uses Ireland or Luxembourg, Guernsey or Jersey or Cayman in terms of a fund jurisdiction, whether they pick that particular fund director, that particular ManCo, that particular service provider. Commercially, it really makes absolutely no difference to us, although we like to think, as I already said, that we have some knowledge in all the areas that we've selected to put into this service.
Okay, this is the last one. Some organizations have bundled offerings, including ManCos, fund directors, and regulatory compliance etc. Do you include information on them as well?
Sorry, do you mind reading that question
Yeah.
out again? Sorry, I didn't catch it all. Apologies.
Some organizations have bundled offerings, including Mancos, fund directors, reg compliance. Do you include information on them as well?
Sorry, what compliance? Regulatory compliance, you said?
I think it is regulatory.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I mean, that's one of the trends in the last few years. There are some well-known organizations. I touched upon their names in terms of in the Manco business that have come from the sort of governance side, the Kahns, the Waystones, the KBs of this world, and probably some others out there that do offer a range of services in the type of areas that person put into his or her question. And there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't include those companies in the in terms of the intelligence and the service we're putting. Absolutely, they will be in the Mancos. We'll just best describe as we possibly can the service that they're offering, which in some respects will differ from some of the other Mancos that are out there. Without wishing to be controversial, it might mean, for the reasons I gave when we were talking about what goes into the criteria for independent selection for the green rated database, those directors perhaps wouldn't be in the green rated category because, for example, if you're working for Kahn, I don't wish to pick out Kahn in particularly, and your client is BlackRock, you've got BlackRock does a huge amount of work with Kahn. Is that particular person truly independent when he or she is sitting on the board of a BlackRock fund? It could be the same for any, it could be KB, it could be Waystone, it could be many others as well. It's not just them. And so doesn't mean to say we won't be including them. We will be including them with those caveats I've just mentioned. So yes, we will be absolutely in the Manco area. Whether or not they make the independent director criteria is another matter.
Okay.
Another question that's come in?
Yeah, we've got one more. What are the criteria for fund admins and Mancos to be shortlisted?
What are the criteria for funds admins and Mancos to be short? In terms of, there is no objective for, if a manager has to come to us and say, we are looking for this particular type of Manco, and then we will provide a short list from what that particular manager has, or his or her advisor has asked us to do. We don't say this is our objective shortlist, because one of the contentions behind this service is that every manager, every fund is different. Everybody has individual circumstances. Everybody is looking perhaps for something that's slightly different. So we're not saying this is always what's right for manager X is not going to be right for manager Y necessarily. It might be, but that is not necessarily the case. So our contention is that you need to tailor that particular shortlist to the particular manager in terms of what he or she is asking for in terms of particular needs. In the case of Mancos, there are only, Samantha, you put that list together the other day, there's what, 20, 15 of them? So it's not a very long list, and there probably are a few more out there that we don't have. So, you're only selecting, let's say, from about 20, but from that 20, there is a big range of different firms within that group of 20. So, it's, if people want a particular individual type of Manco, personalized service, which specializes in private equity, for example, or happy to go to a more broader service, then we can accommodate that. Same with service providers, but as I said, with service providers, our specialization there is only on those that are reaching a certain standard of ESG capability. Are those all our questions?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you all very much for joining us today. As I said at the beginning of this presentation, a lot of this, in terms of what we're doing, will be covered in our US publication, FSI. The November issue should be out next week. Also, a lot of this stuff will be in some of our other publications as well. As we go into next year, we very much hope and expect that we'll be able to provide real data on the market in terms of who's going in which direction, selecting what type of entities in the areas that we've been talking about this afternoon. So if you're in the States, have a very good lunch and afternoon. If you're over here in Europe, have a very good evening, wherever you may be, and hopefully see you the next time. All right, goodbye, everybody.